speaking with Dr. Eileen Hulme, who I certainly consider one of the greatest student affairs administrators that I've ever known, and who has been a great mentor for me in student affairs. And Dr. Hulme has a very deep history in higher education as a whole, and has served many areas of higher education, but absolutely has served many years in student affairs throughout her career. Dr. Hulme, would you introduce yourself a little bit, and would you tell us what you're currently doing, but also how did you end up moving into the profession of student affairs?
Okay, great, Whit. Thanks so much for asking me to do this. I currently serve at a school in Indiana called Indiana Wesleyan University. I'm in the Indianapolis national and global non-traditional side of the institution, and I serve as the Vice President for Enterprise Development and Regional Ventures, which is a little different than student affairs work. I came through student affairs, started out as a hall director at Trinity University and director of student activities at University of Houston, and then dean of students, and did my PhD at UT, and then went to become the vice president for student life at a small Quaker school in Portland, Oregon called George Fox. Then I came back and was the vice president for student affairs at Baylor, and then went into the faculty at Azusa Pacific in Los Angeles. So that was a fast marking of my career, but I started not, a lot of people come into student affairs because they were RAs or in student government and they loved, working in that area. And so they chose this profession. I didn't do that. I was teaching school, 8th grade, and hated it, and was looking around during the summer for maybe something else to do. And a friend of mine was going out to California to be a hall director at a university. I was living in Fort Worth at the time. And I decided that the Olympics were going to be, this is going to date me, right? That the Olympics were going to be out in Los Angeles during this, I was a hall director in a master's program. And the Olympics were going to be there during those 2 years. And so I said, I'm going to go to LA and be a hall director so I can go see the Olympics. And that was my entry into student affairs. And all these years later, I'm not exactly in student affairs, but I'm still in higher education. So life is funny, isn't it, Whit? You don't always come through the front door. Sometimes you come through the side windows, and you just live into whatever experience it is that is ahead of you. So that's how I got into it. I will say that the longer I was in student affairs, the more I liked it. And for some people, it's just the opposite. They like to be the hall director and work with students directly. And I did love students. I do love students, and I love that part of it. But my strengths are in strategy and vision. And so the higher up I got, the more I was able to use those strengths and the more I enjoyed it. But you'll find that in your career that there'll be certain roles and levels of it that you'll really enjoy and others you won't. And so I always say, just keep moving and see until you find the area and the level that you love the most. But anyway, wow, we went off the rails there, Whit. Answered a little bit more of the question than you asked.
That's fantastic. In your years of experience in student affairs, why do student affairs matter in higher education? How do they serve the student?
Whit, I would, through my career, I would have answered that differently at different times. But after all these years and even studying the research and doing some of those kind of things, I have settled on that student affairs is critical to the learning process. It's critical in higher education because it creates a sense of community and a sense of belonging for students. And, some people might kind of poo-poo that or whatever, is not that important. But you begin to understand that what the research tells us is when people feel like they belong, when people feel like they really are part of something, they do better academically, they retain in the institution, all sorts of great things happen. But they have to feel like they belong. And so I think that this is a really important to think about what it is that makes a student feel like they belong, because it's very different for different races and ethnicities. It's very different for men than women. It's very different from students who come from different countries. So I think student affairs role is to have a wide understanding of all different types of students, races, ethnicities, genders, sexual identities, just a wide range of understanding. And in all that understanding, work hard to make people feel a part of a community. And that sounds easy, but it's the hardest thing that we do, because so many of our students that leave feel so deeply alienated by the higher education experience. And I think people in student affairs get to work one-on-one with students. They get to be the bridge between the cultures they were in and the lives they were leading before and entering into a new community, into a new place. And so I think that that's really critical. Now, I think there are a lot of other things that happen, good things that happen to students while they're involved in student affairs: leadership, communication, self-efficacy, just a lot of really good things that we can show and demonstrate. But if you had to ask me the single most important, it would be to develop a psychological sense of community among the students.
In your experience, what is maybe the one or two characteristics that student affairs professionals need to truly support students well and help them with learning, holistic learning?
Well, these may seem a little different. It's hard to narrow it down, but I would say two things. I would say curiosity and compassion. And I say curiosity because of a couple of reasons. One is we can't really get to know other people unless we're interested in them, unless we're curious about them. And if we want to help students feel like they belong, we have to be really interested in them. We have to ask them great questions. We have to want to know their stories. We have to be curious all the time. But I also think curiosity is an important aspect of living, working, breathing in a university, because the purpose of a university is to learn. And learning should always be at the center of what we think about in student affairs. And I think learning, engaged learning, really deep, engaged, life-changing learning starts with curiosity. So I think people in student affairs need to model that. You need to find what you can be curious about, and you need to chase it down. You need to be demonstrating to students that you're constantly learning, that you're constantly growing, that you're not just set, and that you're asking yourselves and you're asking other people hard questions all the time. So I think curiosity is one. But I also think compassion is the second one. I think you can be curious and interested in a person, but it takes compassion to really, I think, want to enter into their experience and want to care about them deeply and want to love them. And I just think that that's at the heart of what we do. Is we have to, even though, on a daily basis, students would do things that would frustrate me or make my job 10 times harder or whatever, but I always had to bring some level of compassion to the conversation. You had to have some sense of trying to understand from their perspective, and to not that we can ever walk in another person's shoes, but you can always try to walk in another person's shoes. And just the trying, I think, is a mark of a great student affairs professional. So I'd say curiosity and compassion. I could probably think of about 15 other C's, like creativity and those kind of things. And I guess you have to be cute. That's another C. But
Yeah, there you go.
those are my things that I think we bring. And sometimes I think in student affairs, we leave our curiosity at the door. And I would say we need to embrace it and bring it on, bring more of it, ask more questions.
Absolutely. Dr. Hulme, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. And I hope everyone has a good program and learns a lot and finds their passion to be curious about.
Absolutely. Thank
All
you.
right, take care.